Good evening, everyone. I'm Joe Abadi, and you're watching Vintage Motocross Q&A. Thank you for joining me tonight. The show is made possible by our sponsors, Motion Pro, Vintco, Full Circle Racing, ReplicaMotorcycleParts.com, the International Motocross Museum Racer X, and Preston Petty Products. Don't forget to keep sharing the show wherever you may be. Check back on Vintage Motocross Q&A's Facebook page tomorrow, and we'll be sure to give away some stickers or something nice from one of our sponsors. My guest tonight has been involved in the motocross game for over 50 years now. As a racer, as a promoter, as a restoration expert, he has supplied parts to so many of us as the vintage motocross scene really came on big. He's also put together some incredible bikes that we're going to ask him about over the past 5 or 6 years, where he has auctioned them off at the Mika Motorcycle Auction. Always something fantastic. Coming out of Arizona, and my friend and guest tonight, who is Mr. Dave Boydstun. Dave, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Joe. I'm flattered. Thank you.
It's our pleasure, Dave, and we are going to be talking about the Mika Motorcycle Auction and so many other things that you are involved in. But usually my first question is, because it's always an interesting story and sometimes unusual, how people wind up getting a motorcycle or a mini bike. Where did you grow up, Dave? What was your first recollection of your first motorcycle or mini bike?
Well, as a little kid, my dad was in the Navy. He was an instructor. We traveled a lot back and forth across the country regularly, 2 to 3 times a year, and even out of the country. So at different times, you meet different people. One time I met a bunch of kids ice skating. And as soon as the ice melted, this kid had a 50 Honda, and I was a better skater than him. And I told him I knew how to ride a bike, and he let me ride it. And of course, I rode it straight across the street into the curb, crashed hit the curb over the bars. And that was my first experience. You know, I was like the one that would do anything and then get a big cut in my head or something for it. But that's my first experience. And as we moved to the West Coast again, and we had made friends, my dad promised my sister a horse and me a motorcycle, or mini bike, as it would be, if we didn't argue. And actually, the first time I think my sister and I ever agreed on anything was that. And I got my Bonanza mini bike, and she got her first horse, and that kind of started everything going.
Where did you move to in California, Dave, that you were able to have a horse and a motorcycle?
Fountain Valley, right next to Huntington Beach, and we were surrounded by asparagus fields and corn fields and lots of fields that they were terracing off to build things on, and they never had any security. So we'd go over there when they weren't working and jump off the ledges they were grading and ride through the water puddle that collected after the rain and dodge the farmer. You know, when he'd come running, he'd drive by and couldn't turn around. We'd be in the bushes and head the other way, stop and wave at him and make him chase us. So, but Huntington Beach, Fountain Valley area.
Yeah, certainly a great place for a kid with a mini bike or a little girl with a horse to grow up. As time progressed, Dave, did you advance onto a mini cycle, a motorcycle? How was that? How was that introduction made? Because we've all went through that mini bike stage, but it's usually something a little more influential or another person that gets you involved with a full-size motorcycle. How did it happen for you?
Well, the mini bike, already I figured out where the governor was, and of course we were riding around pulling it over, and the thing actually lost the rod. So my dad went to Montgomery Ward's and brought a 5 horsepower motor, and he came home with this jack shaft thing. I didn't even know what it was. And all of a sudden, this thing would climb any hill. It wouldn't go very fast, but it would climb any hill. And I started to meet motorcycle guys. Carl Cotton and Dick Frampton were 2 guys that 3 years later, we raced in a 3-hour team race against those 2 guys. And me and my partner actually won the race against everybody. And they were experts, but they were the locals at the hill climb that we would go and try to climb the mini bike up a little bit, little further. Finally, I pop over the top one day, and the guy goes, "What's your name?" And I said, "Dave." And he said, "Well, my name's Carl. Nice to meet you, Dave. This is my friend Dick." Then the next weekend I come out, I see those 2 guys over there again on the corner. They'd watch all the little kids ride. And I rode up the hill, straight up that freaking hill with that 5 horsepower jack shaft thing. And they go, "Dave, man, you're riding good." And I rode right over to my dad and said, "Dad, they call me by my name. I'm one of them now." I really did feel like that was the step to total equalization of no matter what your experience was or your age. We were all motorcyclists now.
Yeah.
And so I got myself in trouble. My dad took the mini bike away. He always worked in the garage. He drilled a hole through my sprocket and put a padlock through it in the chain so I could start it, wash it, work on it, but I wasn't riding it for 9 weeks. I never got another bad report card. And about 6 months later, my dad brought home two 100 Yamaha Trailmasters in the back of a 67 El Camino that he bought the day before. So I haven't located the 100 Trailmaster yet, but I do have the Bonanza and I do have the El Camino. So I'm trying to put my history back together, the beginning.
I have to say this to you, Dave, that Yamaha YL2C Trailmaster, when you find one, 5.2, because that was my first bike as well.
What color was yours?
Red.
Mine was the black one.
Yeah.
Mine was the black one. Yeah. Yeah, that was a great bike, but boy, was it tall for a little kid at the time.
Yeah.
You would fill the exhaust pipe with water, take the baffle out, fill it with water, and then take the spark plug out and have electric start races in the street with them without them running and just shift gears and watch the water shoot out the tailpipe. And that bike ran for about 6 months.
Yeah.
It was a great motorcycle because it was dependable and we could just go ride a lot.
Sure. Yeah. And it was a great bike, and I have nothing but good memories about it. While we're talking about motorcycles, Dave, don't forget Full Circle Racing. They got a great special going on yet, just $775 for two new rims, 18, 19, or 21 inch. That comes with new spokes and nipples, laced and true. Get your hubs up to Tom McAllister at Full Circle Racing. And this special will end eventually, but right now it's still going on, $775. If you're just joining me, my guest tonight is Dave Boydstun. We're talking about his time growing up in California. Dave, going through school and wanting to be part of that motocross or off-road group. I'm sure you had chores. I'm sure you had a job at one point. Tell us about that.
Well, I worked at, like they say, show me someone whose first job wasn't McDonald's. Mine was. And I made $1.10 an hour, I think it was at the time. And I worked an hour and a half. And then I had to take a 10-minute break. And the manager came over to me working the French fry basket in the hot oil.
Yeah.
And told me I had it in the wrong hand. And I was left-handed. And she reached over me, took it out of my hand and burnt my arm. I still have the scar from that. So when I took that 10-minute break, right next to me was Ron's mini cycle where Gene Woods and them all got their start in Huntington Beach. And right on the other side of that was Taco Bell. Dennis Chandler worked at Taco Bell. He was the other kid with the mini bike, the kid with the 100 Yamaha. We always back and forth. And I walked over and said, dude, would they give me a job at Taco Bell? Enough with this. Thank you. No, thank you. No, thank you. Thank you. To fellow employees was driving me nuts at McDonald's, So I started working at Taco Bell, and then I became a shopper for Taco Bell because I was allergic to dairy products and I'd always get it wrong. So I was a perfect shopper to go into a store and I'd eat for free, fill out a form. And that was like my second job was Taco Bell, which I liked that. But once I started riding and went right through the ranks and was pro, it wasn't very long. We were riding Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, Saturdays someplace, or Saturday night and Sunday in CMC every Sunday. So I didn't have time for a damn job.
Let's back up a minute because you just mentioned Ron Woods and a couple of other guys who went on to have some fame and and success as well in motorcycle racing. I understand at some point, though, you worked at a Kawasaki shop and you were also friends with Tom White way back before White Brothers.
Okay, so one day my dad had taken me up to Saddleback Park and they had a little TT track in the back. And at that point, I was still not allowed to ride further than my dad could see because I was going to be in trouble if I left his site. I just was. So we would ride the TT track, which if you went there early was by the front gate, but that became the back gate. But we would ride around the track. And one day there was a guy on a Bull Taco on the track and there was a guy on the DT1 and they had leathers on. And I would race anyone that came on the track. And I was racing this guy, and every time we'd come to the right-hand turn up the TT jump, he would let off, and I would go around him. And I thought he was just letting me pass him. But apparently he didn't make right-hand turns very good. We'd go over the jump, and I would hog him and take him to the top at the next turn, and then he would pass me down the back straightaway, shifting 2 more times than my little 100 Yamaha would go. Then a guy in a Bull Taco came out, and he was riding around, and those two guys kind of swapped back and forth for a few laps. Then one of them pulled off and I saw him talking to my dad up on the hill. And I wondered, why is he talking to my dad? Maybe he needs a tool or something. So I ride up there and stop, and I got an open face helmet at the time. These guys have Bell Stars. And one guy turns around and I said, "You're the guy that works at Ruston Motorcycles." The other guy pulls up behind him and he takes his helmet off and he said, "We both do." And it was Tom and Dan White. It was Tom and Dan White at the time. And I said, "You both work there?" He goes, "Yeah, but Bob doesn't know, so don't say anything." Because they just had a part-time job. They were about 4 years older than me, and I was 14 or something, 13. And so when he had talked to my dad, he asked who I was. And my dad says, "Well, he's just a kid that comes in a motorcycle shop and just learning to ride." And he said, "Well, I raced last Saturday night at Elsinore, TT, District 37. We didn't know what the hell he was talking about. AMA, what's that?" He said, "I won the amateur class," and Tom, my brother that just pulls up, says he won the expert class. "And you're passing us every lap on the right-hand turn." And I said, "Well, my mom will never let me race." And Dan says, "Yeah, that's what your dad just told us. But I'm telling you, it's a good thing. It's good people. And you need to come to one of the races." And I said, "That's never going to happen. My mom's not going to let that happen." And then Tom and Dan rode a little bit more, and then they were going to work, apparently at Ruston's. And they came over and suggested that my mom come by the motorcycle shop next Saturday around noon, and if my dad could bring her there. Well, it turned out that's when Tom's mom would bring them lunch. And once the two were working there, we called them the Campbell Soup Twins because they did look alike. They were older and they looked like. And so the two ladies go off talking right away. And my mom comes back. She's happy. She met a nice lady, and we got to go someplace else and see you guys later. And at dinner that night, they told me that they decided I could go to this motorcycle meeting. And I thought, well, wonder what he said. Well, it wasn't until Tom White was dying from cancer. Yeah. And I sent him some stuff, and he saw that I was looking for my birth parents. I was adopted. So I was looking for my birth parents, and Tom contacted me when he found her and wanted to know what it was like and all that. And that's when he told me he was adopted and told me he knew there was something weird about our relationship from the beginning. And I think that the two mothers talked, and Tom and Dan had been a handful at school and been one school to the other and almost got separated, you know, as being adopted. They were. That was the bond that the two women saw that allowed me to go to the meeting. Well, so then things went, and I went to the meeting, and first race was the opening race at Huntington Beach Cycle Park. Gene Woods was on a mini bike race, and Jeff Ward there that day. Larry Huffman was the dang announcer of the racetrack. I didn't know any of these people. I didn't know Tom White. He became the track champion at the time.
I think it's so interesting, Dave, that you've crossed paths with so many people that have had a modicum or had become very, very famous in the industry, and you cross paths with so many of them. Including Tom White, Gene Woods, and so many more. What I wanted, and I want to thank you for sharing that bit of information about, I guess, the White brothers were adopted as well as you were. A little bit later on in the show, I do want to ask you about being reunited with your birth mom. You had it on Facebook. That's why I'll ask about it. If
it's okay.
Wasn't public knowledge, I wouldn't bring it up in conversation, but we'll talk about that. Right now, I got to take a hard break, run a commercial. We'll be right back with more Dave Boydstun.
Motocross struck America, coming from Europe like a lightning bolt, striking the hearts and minds of people all across the country and the world. Battles of intense racing and cutting rivalries with loyalty to brands and heroes intensified as years of blood, sweat, and dirt flew through the minds of those memories of champions as they wrestled their machines through almost impossible tracks. But where are those past champions? And where are their bikes? Terry Good, an ex-pro motocross racer, has made it his life mission to honor these heroes and the bikes they rode to stardom. We raced, we rode, we lived and breathed motocross. Go back in time and relive those moments. now preserved for the first time ever in the world's first museum dedicated to the history of motocross. Our new building is in the gate. Help us get a great start and you can be part of history. Go to internationalmotocrossmuseum.org and become a part of our team.
Sure to visit the International Motocross Museum website and, of course, their Facebook page. It's a 501c3 not-for-profit organization. Get yourself a hat, a clock, some swag. They got great shirts, posters, all sorts of great things going on there at the International Motocross Museum. And a little bit later on in the show, I will have an announcement that you probably read about a little bit earlier in the month. About me and the International Motocross Museum. But right now, my guest is Dave Boydstun. We talked about his introduction into mini-cycles, motorcycles, racing, parents, and so many other things. Dave, you went on to become a test rider at Kawasaki at some point?
Yeah. It turns out that a friend of mine that I would take to the races when he was 15 and not old enough, and we're still good buddies. He's crazy. He's out of control. I don't know how we're still alive. But I would take him to the races, and he got a job, and he rode actually Hangtown on the KLX 250 piece of junk. Okay. He was their test rider for the four-stroke thing that they actually were messing with a little bit later. But I got involved in being able to ride a bike for them each day for $100 bill in an envelope, and all I had to do is fill the form out on what I thought was right or wrong with the bike. And this bike was the prototype F11M that Brad Lackey and Jim Weinert would ride afterwards, and John DeSoto. So It had a piston port motor. I was there when Jim Cook rode a Boydstun framed Bighorn, and Jerry Marcel, the mechanic, came in this white lab coat. He had this kind of red birthmark on his face. You can see a picture of him holding the cylinder. That is the piston port cylinder they put on the rotary valve bike and made it a 410. And they were just trying to make a thin, a narrow motor. So when it came in, it was built by the C&J frame guy, the frame. The wheel was a Bultaco wheel on the front, a Mako wheel on the back, a Mako airbox, a Husky seat. A&A made some fenders that had Bader, which was Dymex Moto Imports in Santa Ana, which brought Bogue in before it was called Bogue Mulholland. It was just black shock spring and everything. And that's the forks that we used, and they used those hammerheads, which sort of look like the Red Wings that we actually sold at. I worked at Dymex Motor. I worked a bunch of places for about 10 minutes. Yeah. So I would get paid each day to ride this bike, and then one Friday, there was no cell phones or anything. I knew that everybody in Cowie was partier people, and they would all leave early on Friday and go to happy hour. I wasn't even old enough to do that, or I didn't do it. I was 21 before any of that stuff got to me. Now I'm only like 18 or 19. So I wanted to be a serious motorcycle racer. So I called on Friday up on Irvine coming back from Saddleback and told them I had a flat tire on the car and I wouldn't make it back in time. And they said, no problem. I'll see you on Monday. I was with my friend Mark Brown. You've met him up at Vegas too. That's 7th grade, 8th grade friend of mine. Yeah. And I said, we're racing Carlsbad on Sunday, dude. They won't know. And we went down there and rode in the mud, and I won. And I rode for a helmet company, which was called JP Helmets. And that was Jesse Padilla, a Mexican guy. And he sold his helmet company to a Japanese company. And I wasn't riding no Japanese helmet. So I got a sponsor from Bell. And he sold to Arai at the time. Yeah. And he went out of business. But I wore a different helmet at every race, and I would give it to Kelvin or whatever track I was, and they would raffle it off. And that was the promotion for the helmet company. That one happened to be a hot pink helmet. So apparently they talked about the dude on the prototype bike in the mud with the hot pink helmet. And I got fired. I came in on Monday. He said, you don't need to sit down. My name was over the PA system. That was Brian Farnsworth. He's still around. Yeah. And when Brian worked in the auto industry, the funny thing was I used to see this dude's name in Cycle News, and his name was Clutch Cargo. Apparently, he wasn't allowed to race anymore, so he used a cartoon character. And I remember Clutch Cargo, yeah. So, but just got lucky and met some great people from the very beginning, and nobody ever said, dude, calm down a little bit. I saw Brian at the auction maybe 15 years ago, going up the escalator with Tom White when I was with Nancy. And I said, Nancy, that's Tom White. That's the dude that talked my mom into letting me go to the meeting. And then when Brian turned the corner, I said, Nancy, that's the dude that fired me at Kawasaki. She's going, bull. And I said, really? And I yelled out, Brian. And he turned around and he said, Boydstun. And I said, holy shit, you remember my name? And he said, yeah. He said, nobody got a job at Kawasaki without knowing somebody. And you knew Clay Moosoff and Barry Fulcher, who was one of the mechanics, I think, in helping Weinert out at the beginning when he first came there. And I asked him if I'd come back in on Monday with my tail between the legs, would I've had the job back? And he said, sure, dude, we were all friends. We all made mistakes. I said, shit, I went to work for EPA riding street bikes and got fired for getting 2 tickets in a week on them. So, yeah, but it was a great time. Kawasaki was a wonderful time. I had no idea, but I could tell a difference of a bike that worked and didn't work. And I didn't realize I even had much value for that. And I got a ride on the Boyd and Stellings bikes, and first aluminum swing arm, first adjustable steering head. Thor Waltzen came in and bought one and paid cash for it. And we didn't nickel plate the frame. And we made all the orange bodywork from the first year TM fitted. And the Japanese didn't find out for about 6 weeks till they went to a desert race and said, what's that frame? And he said, you don't pay me enough for that. But Jones came in and bought the swing arm from us. And it's in the ad. There's a full page ad of Elsinore with a gold and white shirt. Look at the ad closely. You can't tell whose rider it is. It is Gary Jones, but look real close and you'll see a Boyd and Stellings aluminum swing arms painted black on that bike. And that's on.
You also had some interesting relationships or built friendships with some another unusual builder. His name was Kelvin Franks.
Kelvin Franks and Stu Peters met each other at the Motocross to Nations in Europe, who knows what year, but before motocross came here. And they were two people that spoke the Queen's English. And I have a photo of them in an early Cycle Guide magazine. And Stu is standing under the American flag, and Kelvin is standing under the Australian flag. And they came, and Stu invited him home. And they bought a house between Saddleback and Carlsbad, same exact difference, which is Mission Viejo. And they both settled right in there, and they started CMC, and they went to work for Edison Dye, which most people don't know. And they ran the race at Pepperell, Massachusetts, which was the very first race in the introduction of the traveling circus, or whatever Edison Dye called that thing. Yeah. And Silverthorne told me he was sent back there with all these Europeans, Robert de Coster, a Greaves rider might have been Brian Wade, and a couple of Husky riders in the van. And he drove a stick shift 6-cylinder Ford van. Joe Robert bought a freaking 45 and cowboy boots and a hat, and would shooting out the windows going through Arizona at every street sign he went by. And, there's a little Wide World of Sports mini viewer thing that comes in a package, and it's a promotional pack that gives you all the terms of motocross. Bill Silverthorne's actually on the cover of that. Bill Silverthorne was greatness, dude, in the motocross world. We didn't realize that. They were all like our age of our fathers, and we were all 15 and we had a bike, kind of thing. Yeah. But I want to thank.
I got to get a quick plug in here from my sponsor, ReplicaMotorcycleParts.com. Paul Parkinson Sr. We'll be able to visit with him at the York Swap Meet, which is coming up in January. But Paul Parkinson Sr. and ReplicaMotorcycleParts.com, just one of the great items that they have out right now, a replica silencer for the 1973-74 Honda CR250. I have one in my shop. It is absolutely an exact replica. And from what I understand, what Paul tells me is he's going to be coming up with some gear sets for the Elsinores, as well as a good possibility that I'll be making some gear sets, transmission parts, I hear cylinders, and a lot of other things coming out from Paul Parkinson Sr. and ReplicaMotorcycleParts.com. Dave, you were one of the few people who had some success on an AJS. How'd that happen?
Some success. Well, I call that a career-ending motorcycle, actually. And Jack Malone was Morris's dad. Jack was great to me. Morris's bike always ran better than anybody else's. There was no doubt. I got Morris's worn-out practice bikes, and my race bike never ran as good as his practice bike did. The AJS was an odd odd machine, and I guess it was preparing me for the future of vintage racing when I found this thing called a cotton and put it together. And it uses the bottom end of an AJS, and it's up for low on the right hand side and all the weird shit. But I never broke the cotton. The AJS broke almost every weekend. I went through 3 frames in like 12 weeks. The down tubes just snapped off the steering head. Morris broke his in half once. Sorry, Morris. I know you're going to hear this.
Right. And who was the other guy? There's only like 3 guys that I know that had ridden the AJS. It was you, Morris, Malone,
Doug Grant. Doug Grant.
Doug Grant, that's it.
He was number 46. And then the guy that David Starr, the guy who just passed away.
Peter Starr?
Peter Starr just passed away. Peter Starr had taken actual professional photos and made promotional merchandise for AJS Norton Villers, which my boss at AJS was Brian Slark at the time, the head of the Barber Museum.
Sure.
Yeah, so we knew him ever since then too. But yeah, so Gary Kochel was the guy on a lot of the little brochures, the stills. He was very stylish, wearing the Stormers blue and baby blue sleeves and orange chest. And that's a Stormers limited thing. And Starr was the one responsible for making some people famous through great photographs.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a good deal. They got me Bates leathers, which were the hottest leathers I ever wore in my life. The Bell helmet, which was great. I think the guy's name was JR down there, was super nice to me. And I felt guilty taking anything from them guys. And I guess they were used to guys coming there every week and getting a box full. But, you know, they were very nice to me. I wasn't prepared for it. We had no background of anyone that I ever knew, you know, personally was a pro rider or ever even raced a motorcycle before I got involved in it. And, you know, Gary Jones had his father who was a great rider. And, you know, one day we were at Gemco and I told my dad, the guy was behind me, had some numbers in his hand. And I go, Dad, that's the guy that lives on the corner with the green and the blue bike with a rope on the handlebars. And he's what? Well, they were Rickman Triumph twin desert sleds. And I just thought they broke down, so they had to have rope on the bars, but they used to tow everybody in. And this was Ron Nelson, the John DeSoto's teammate, and his father lived in my neighborhood, and he was visiting his dad. So he saw me with my dad at Gemco, and he said, "Aren't you the kid that rides the mini bike around the neighborhood?" And I said, "Oh, I've got my second motorcycle now." Really? I go, "Yeah, I wore that 100 out. My dad got me AT1 MX." And he said, "Do you know what Saddleback is?" And yeah. And he said, "Well, they're going to have a motocross race there this weekend. And I have a flyer at the house. I don't need it. If you want to come by when you get a chance." As soon as we got home, man, I got on my bicycle and I was sitting at his garage door. And it was the July 4th Firecracker Grand Prix at Saddleback Park. And that was my first motocross race. 18-inch wheels, trials tires, Bellstar helmet, lineman's boots. Yeah, I was ready. And that's how I got started. And I didn't want to ride desert again. I broke down and sat out there all freaking day waiting for somebody. And we didn't carry water with us. We didn't know any of that.
Yeah.
So motocross was cool. TT and flat track was wait all day for a race that was over in a second. And that little 100 green streak would kick our ass no matter who was on it. So when I rode motocross, you didn't need a 21-inch wheel. You really didn't need a knobby. I just went wherever they weren't riding. They went there, I went there. And before you know it, you know, there was a series starting and I won the first 3 rounds of the Hallman series. And then I ran into a girl running to class late behind the lockers and she stepped out and I hit her, dislocated my jaw and fucking broke my thumb and couldn't ride the rest of the series and then got made intermediate off that. And me, Warren Burrell, Mike Cram, Randy Myers, who became CMC #1, we all became the first intermediate riders in CMC. They only had junior and senior at that time. But within a couple of races, I beat a couple of the experts that got like $10 or $5, which was a lot of money back then. This gas was like 23 cents or something. But I beat a couple of them and I went up to Kelvin and I go, "I just want to be an expert. I don't need no more trophies. I can beat those guys and they're getting money." And he goes, "Nope, you got to ride the rest of the series." Before the series was over, I was riding a 125 Honda street bike right in front of school when a lady had a heart attack at the wheel and ran over me and broke 43 fractures in me. So that's what took me out of being the pro rider that had a future. And then that's when I got the job as a test rider at Kawasaki Motor Vehicles and these other jobs. So I was fragile. I broke my femur in 10 places, both dislocated hips, both shoulders. I went under the left front and rear wheel of this car as she had a heart attack and fell forward. She was waiting for her son to get out of school. and ran
I
right
never
over.
knew that. I never had any idea of that story. Dave, I
Yeah.
got to take a hard break. We'll be right back, and we'll have more from Dave Boydstun.
Vinco, who already has a full line of vintage parts, now has air shocks that are an exact duplicate of the original air shocks so popular in the late 70s. So whether you're looking to build a full racer or museum showpiece, these shocks will give you that incredible 70s look and improve your bike's performance. These new air shocks are fully rebuildable with Vinco rebuild kits, and all shocks are hand assembled in the USA with all new components. Every component is brand new. Just like the originals, our air shocks are adjustable with 2 chambers, high and low pressure, giving you tremendous flexibility for settings of your bike suspension. The Vinco air shocks come fully assembled and ready for installation. Just add air or nitrogen. The kits include the manual and spacers. Visit Vinco.com to check out the air shocks and all that Vinco has to offer to help you get back on track and to keep that ride going.
All right, we are back with Dave Boydstun. So, Dave, a woman having a heart attack in front of a school hit you on a motorcycle and really put you out of commission.
Yeah, Zervis was her last name, Mary Zervis. And the funny thing was, is her son was one period different than me in high school in PE. And so his locker was right next to mine. And I ran into him one time and he said, "Aren't you the kid?" And he was looking at the scar on my leg and all this. And then I felt bad. His mom passed. She had a heart attack at the wheel. Just keeled over. Yeah. So it's, you just never know what you're going to be dealt, man. And I got clobbered a couple times, but never, it was always an accident at the track. I never saw it coming. Something happened, and next thing you know, a bike came across the infield and cleaned me out or something. But I wasn't really a reckless guy on the bike. I never had grippy foot pegs. Greg Smith used to tell me I was a squirrel and I should get some of his pegs. That's Wheel Smith. I worked for him for a short while too. And he said, "Boydstun, you're an effing squirrel. You can't keep your feet on the pegs." I said, "Then give me a set of those damn pegs. You don't pay me enough." I think I got $1.65 an hour working at his place then, because I got $1.10, then $1.35, then $1.65. Because I always had some kind of a little job along the way. But no, you cross paths with a million people, and you riding in the field in the mini bike. I rolled on the ground with some black guy. Told my dad that guy almost ran into me over there. Well, they'd made a track. It was John DeSoto on a brand new side pipe CZ, and I'm on my 2.5 horsepower mini bike, and he says, "You all right, brother?"
Yeah.
I never met a Hawaiian guy before at 14 or 15 years old, whatever it was.
Yeah.
So you just didn't know. And I liked this girl at school and went to her house, and her sister was dating and married Dave Rogers, and she was dating Tim Hart and Tom Rapp. So both Tim Hart and Tom Rapp were over at the house. And then next thing you know, Donnie Emler shows up and he's trying to get Mary, the girl I like, and he chased Mary Grigg. So they all drove before me. They all partied before me. And I was just this little pimple-faced kid, that was 15, that I liked the girl that rode the dirt bike, and that was Mary Grigg. She had a little 125 Yamaha like mine too.
Dave, it's incredible. It really, really is how many paths have crossed and how many careers you've seen early on, even before they were even having careers. Time went on, and I met you, I think it was 2001 or 2002. It was at Thunder Ridge, New York, right near Unadilla. But just right before that, you became very involved with ARMA. Tell me about your time at ARMA and getting involved in the vintage scene.
Okay, first I want to say that's the day that I met Tim Ronceville. And Tim Ronceville is the guy who passed that day.
Yes.
Bruce introduced me to his brother, and unfortunately, that he passed that day of a massive heart attack. I went to the USGP in 1990 that Rick Dowdy was involved with. When I first called, the people on the phone seemed to be excited that I wanted to be involved, but I didn't want to give somebody a bike to ride because I didn't even have a car. I did not have a car. At that time, Joe, I was living on two 2x12s with a 2x4 nailed to the wall and the 2x12 sitting on top of a hot water heater in a laundry room of some girls I knew. Telling you, I say motorcycles saved my life. I wandered, happy hour, party, whatever. We'll just leave the details.
Right.
But when that race came, I was standing by the fence, man, and all those pros were online, and they wouldn't let me in the pits because now AMA racing was pro and you had to be somebody, and I wasn't. I was just a guy who wandered back into it. So I stood by the wash rack with my friend that liked bikes and was from New York and had Can-Ams. So I already had, you're from New York and you like Can-Ams. I don't know how we're friends, but I guess it's this motorcycle thing. But so I talked him into going to Glen Helen, and he drove me out there, and we went to the GP. So I said, let's go over and stand by the wash rack. And one by one on Saturday, they all came out with their bikes. They all called me by my last name. They did not call me by my first name. There was too many Daves back in the day. Everyone was kind of known. That's DeStefano. That's Weinert. That's Lackey. They didn't call them by their first name. So not that I'm one of them, but I was Boydstun, and I wasn't another one of them names. And they asked me, what have you been doing? What have you been doing? This and that and everything. And I didn't tell them what I've been doing. Screwing around doing nothing is what I've been doing. So I'm over by the start line, and I'm on the far end over there. And I can't see. The dirt has going up against the fence like Redbud has too. If you ain't 7 foot tall, you can't see because the dirt, you know. So right before the gate fell down, I flipped the big steel trash can over, got Frank to hold the trash can, and I stood up on top of the trash can, and now I had a perfect view of the starting line. And I go, no way. DeSoto took Higgins out in the first turn, and the guy standing right next to me looks up and says, is that Boydstun? And I go, holy shit, you're Kevin Crawford. You used to have a Rickman Hodaka at El Toro. I have no idea how I remembered that guy. But I looked at him. He was Kevin Crawford, and that's how vintage started. So I came home from there, and that race was run in August. They came with a GP at Glen Helen in August, the hottest freaking month set up by the Europeans by data. So I came home from that jabbering the whole way home. I got to start a vintage club. I got to get involved in this. I'd been going out with a friend with a three-wheeler that his kids skateboarded in these contests. I used to run skateboard contests. Oh, I had an action sports team with BMX skateboards, roller skaters, frisbee players, hacky sacks. We do safety shows, about 400 of them a year. Do 2 in schools each day. And so I was flagging, and the guy said, hey, they're going to open this new track. Where's it going to be? Oh, it's Mel Larson's old track. That became Speed World. The legendary track Speed World that was here for 25 years. That had 14 different types of tracks on it. And they said, if you come over and help us lay the track out next week, we'll let you have a halftime vintage race. You give me all the dudes' names. Everybody gets in free. The entry's free. Trophy's free. No way. So I said, okay. I lived 37 miles from there, and I hitchhiked all the way across town and was at the racetrack the next morning. And at the end of the day of helping them, they said, well, where'd you park? I said, I ain't got a car. And they go, how'd you get here? I go, I hitchhiked. I looked at the map. It was straight across town, 27 miles to Grand Avenue and 11 up there. And they go, you kidding me? I said, no. So a little bit after that, I found a Toyota Celica for sale, and it wasn't registered. It had a blown head. My friend was a great heliarcher. We took the head off it and fixed the cracks in the head, and the thing ran great. So it had a license plate that went down for the trailer hitch to plug in. So I got a trailer to pull behind it right away. I found a dead trailer, and I found a dead rusty DKW, and I put it on the trailer, and you never saw my license plate. So for the next year, I just drove around with that bike on that trailer and never had insurance registration, and got this Speed World started and got vintage going. Every time I'd stop somewhere at a construction site, somebody would tell me where another rusty bike was, and they most of the time would give them to me. They felt sorry for me. I was wearing the same pair of Levi's, same T-shirt. I was just smiling because it was a damn dirt bike. And one by one, that's how AMS got started. When I started at AMS, I was a parts puller for $150 a week. $150. I lived on that.
AMS is Arizona Motorcycle Salvage.
That's what it was originally, and then I registered it under sales, service, antique motorcycle specialist. I had about 20 versions of it, but that's what it meant originally, was Arizona Motorcycle Salvage. That guy passed away, got involved in drugs. I went to tell his parents because I had been previously involved in drugs, and I knew what I was seeing. And the kid was pissing the shop away, and it bummed me out. And then they let me go December 14th and told me they just have to and I didn't know what was up. They were going to give him 2 months to run the shop and then take the shop away from him. Well, he got diagnosed terminal with AIDS, refused all the stuff, went down like a rock. And the parents carried me and sold me the complete inventory in the shop for $10,000. And I thought, I never had $10,000 in my life. What are you talking about? And I paid them off in 1 year. And the shop did 1.7 the following year. I was totally sober, totally not interested in anything other than motorcycles at this point. Yeah. And I love going through those bends and tipping them over and seeing what's in the bottom. Oh, look, this is a this, and this is a this, keep this. And then at the end, when the city took the property, they really cashed in and did well. They made about $1.5 million off the $10,000 dirt acre they bought down in the river bottom. And I went home. I went to a retail store, and it took me a month to build the interior, got 2 rental things, cut a wall out, had to put the fire safety doors, mechanics, all this city code crap that I didn't have to deal with before. But they paid me $75,000 to move cash. And I had gotten an infection for getting a surgery on my shoulder. Yeah. And I had a pick IV in this arm right here. That's that little pump on your hip, and it's putting an antibiotic in you because they couldn't get.
I know exactly what it is.
Well, she comes to my house and they appoint you an attorney to look out for so you can't come back and sue the city. And the lady startles me, and I've got a bungee cord holding a big framer's hammer on my arm so I could swing the hammer. And the bungee cord pops off and pulls the pick IV out. She gave me an additional $10,000 hardship award, non-taxable. Dude, once I got back to work, it just fell in my lap. I mean, shit just kept showing up at the shop. Nobody wanted, but I knew what it was. Put it over there. Big trailer loaded scrap metal, in the middle, a YZ strap tank 250A. Not next weekend, Saturday, an old Bull Taco 120, a Pomeroy replica. Holy shit, put that over there. And that's kind of how the thing started. I couldn't believe when I went to the races that I didn't pay to get in. They had free food for me and free entries, and then when I started running the races, I'd pay everybody that worked for me, buy the insurance, get a PA system, get this club going, and I'd come home with $1,800. When I did the Duel in the Desert, I made enough money on the 5th year of the Duel in the Desert to go to 21 ARMA Nationals that year. Plane flights.
We're going to talk about that in just a second, Dave. I got to take a quick break and thank my sponsor, Motion Pro. 20% off the board on everything at Motion Pro upon checkout, except custom cables. Get over to motionpro.com, and when you check out, put in MP9135. That's MP9135. Save 20% across the board on everything at Motion Pro. Thank you, Chris Carter. The Duel in the Desert, Dave, you were an ARMA off-road board member for many years, and then you went on and opened up your own club. A lot of organizations have done this. They became disenchanted with ARMA for whatever reason. Once again, by the grace of God, everything just really fell into place for you with this Arizona Vintage Riders. Tell us how that began and what that does up until this day.
Okay, so most people, they get involved in this the same way you just think I got involved in it, with the order that you just gave, which is like go to an ARMA race and come back and start your own club. There's no ARMA. There was no ARMA. There was no ARMA. My club started September 30th of 1990. ARMA started in May of 1990. There was no internet yet. I didn't travel out of state for any race. I didn't even have a car. And there was no publications that would write anything really, except Cycle News, maybe a little 4-inch square if there was some ARMA event. So I started the race.
I thought your organization started after ARMA. I didn't know this.
No, before. Well, virtually same year. But the thing is, Rick Dowdy and I have always bumped heads on the track in person. We just bump heads. And he called me the spark plug of the Arizona scene, and I take that as a compliment. But when I started the club, it was to give people that couldn't handle the modern track and didn't have the money for a new bike to be able to buy themselves a 74 Can-Am and do a top end on it and ride the bike for an entry fee week after week, and we'll run around all the jumps and stuff like that. as I did that, I learned about ARMA through Paul Schoen. That's the U-Haul family. So Paul Schoen was involved in motocross, and he came to my junkyard one day just looking to see what was in the junkyard when I was working there before I owned it. And he told me about Steamboat Springs. And then I saw this article in Dirt Bike or Motocross Action that showed the Dick Mann Classic that was taking place at either Hollister or Sandhill. It kind of rotated. And I remember there was a twin pipe Suzuki, which was Chris Carter's bike for Motion Pro. Chris Carter is a medalist in ISDT and a former pro level motocross rider, and a very soft spoken guy. He don't toot his horn. I learned this about him. So anyway, I convinced the racetrack that I would help them if they would run that race. We ran that race, and other people showed up that had ARMA stickers on their bike. And I said, well, what's that? What's that? You never heard of that? Nope. The only event they had ever done in Arizona was in August again. Nice choice for Arizona. They went to the road racetrack, dude, and raced on asphalt in August. And I went to it. Took a YZA strap tank, that one off that trailer. I painted it yellow and displayed a few vintage bikes in the corner of the road race pits. That's when I met the ARMA road race people, Dave Crone, Mike Harcourt from Tucson, Jack Turner. They said, when he talks, you don't talk. That's General Jack. You don't talk. And that was the first day I met Jack Turner. And he was a great guy. And so that's how I knew what ARMA was. And then they told me, oh, Paul asked me from U-Haul, come by my house. I'll show you our collection. Well, he lived in that little house next to the U-Haul corporate headquarters. And they had a basement garage that had fucking 1,000 bikes down there, and all classic bikes. And then he had an 8-track tape, and he put it in 8-track, whatever, a VCR, the early one. And he put it in there, and it was Steamboat Springs. And I go, what's this? And he goes, this is the race at Steamboat. They made a video, so I just bought it. We'll watch it. So I was pouring rain, and I wondered why these people were falling down on seemed flat ground until I went there. And that was clay, and it was slick as hell. But that was Steamboat, and it happened once a year. You got to go to Steamboat. I didn't go the following year, but the next year I went, and I went every year until it didn't happen. And every year I went, I took another person. I never would let the guy go with me again. You take somebody with you. I'm taking somebody else. And that's, I think that's how this got big. I met all the guys from Texas, went to a awards party, and they were yelling, Texas, Texas. And there was only me and the road race dude from Arizona. So I said, dude, I want to hear Arizona yelled when we get the trophies around here. Them Texas guys. But I don't believe Diamond Don came. I would have remembered Diamond because I met him in '72 when he came to race Carlsbad.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a little spunky dude back then too. All talk.
Dave, tell me about when the AVDR race is held. What month is it? How many days is it? What are your turnouts like now after all these years?
Okay, so tracks opening and closing. About 5 years back, I had the only true state championship series, which I had a race here in Phoenix, one in Buckeye, and one in Casa Grande. And then I did the Buckeye one, didn't do Casa Grande, went to Tucson. So what I was trying to do is really be a state championship series. And when I got membership from Tucson, at least go down there twice a year for them. It's only 150 miles, but you know, we're not like you guys back east where you go across 3 states in an hour and a half. Everything's like cities back there. But that's how I got it started. And I called ARMA to see if we could do a race. They hadn't been racing until March and had their last race at Tulare in November. So when I did the finals in the desert, that was on the 3rd weekend in November, and I had the last ARMA race on their schedule. And when I did the duel, I chose February 3rd and 4th, or the first weekend in February. It is beautiful here at this time, and it's not safe to be asking everybody to come to your place if you know it could still be winter.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And especially East Coast. That's why March. So when I had got involved more with ARMA and I got involved in setting the schedule, I set the Phoenix race up for the first week of February, March for Florida, and April was Diamond Dawn. So the first 4 races were 4 weeks apart each. They were perfect to get it started. And they were 3 parts of the country to equally give everybody the same shot, you know, mentally that I have a chance to chase this instead of 3 on the West Coast and some guy's got a big lead, because it always kind of plays out like that. So I don't know if that was the answer to your question.
Yeah, I mean, it was. And tell us now, if people are out there listening to this, and I'm sure there will be, tell us about the class structure. How many days is your event? 2 days? What
Okay.
happens?
So I gave the club up after COVID hit. We still struggled and we ran 6, 7 races during that year. But we got lucky to run a duel in 19, and the following week was Daytona, and that's when COVID was announced. So we got ours off with a great attendance, and then we did it, but the attendance dropped off. And it's been a 2-day event. I do vintage on Sunday because I highlight the end of a program is supposed to be the highlight, not the downturn. And I believe that ARMA is a club focused on vintage bikes, and all the others have been invited in.
Yeah.
They wouldn't have started if it wasn't for them. So I really believe that the program should end on a bang. And when it runs this way, you always have the better turnout on vintage day than you do the post vintage day. And I found when I was the off-road director, I could work with a guy I never worked with before and get him to knock that edge off and this edge off, for the face of the jumps or the change, the tracks that we would make to make them friendlier. Well, it was easier for post vintage to deal with it the first day and me stand out there again with him and him see. I think I'll take that one down more for you tomorrow. He would volunteer that. Me and Win Kern at Florida got along instantly, never had a problem. He would say, you just tell my guys, they'll do whatever you want. And we always had a total vintage friendly track. And if you're a vintage guy and you haven't raced like you would be with cabin fever because of winter in the north, and you come to Florida, you're more likely to enter on Saturday to ride for fun in the historic class and get some track time than you are to stick around and ride the rougher track with all the long travel bikes the second day. And it proved because 25% of our entry at the beginning, 25% of our entry at the beginning was vintage bikes in the post-vintage class. And we always had vintage on Sunday because as ARMA kept going, they added trials. It became Saturday. Trials was in ARMA before post-vintage was in ARMA. In fact, flat track was in ARMA. And the first flat track race run I raced, Jeff Smith rode. It was the only flat track he ever rode. That was at Craig, Colorado on a Thursday. Then we'd go to Wednesday. Then you'd go up to ride trials on Thursday in Steamboat. And then Friday was motocross. There was no post-vintage, just vintage. And Saturday was the road race day. So I only stayed the last year to watch road race. I'd never seen the road race, but that Honda 6 was there. And I could hear it running. And I go, dude, I want to see this thing. I didn't know it was 250 cc's. This bike's turning 16,000 RPMs. It is screaming like. So it was really something to see that. And one year at Steamboat, I got there and I come off the track. I couldn't even find my pit. There was no organization of the parking in the parking lot. It was a big black sprayed parking lot with no lines. So they parked anywhere they wanted to. So the following year, I worked on Saturday, and me and Jed, the guy that helped me with my Montesas, Jared Bates, we drove up there, and I brought all the surveyor's tape and duct tape. And I got there before 90% of the people, and I taped that entire parking lot and made a street out of it. I made roads and everything. And Jeff Smith comes up to me and says, this will be funny, Jeff, if you're in. Who told you you could do that? You can't take this upon yourself. Yeah, I said, okay. So I said, well, Jeff, I couldn't find my way back to the truck. There was so many people pulled in once practice started, it wasn't safe to drive. So the following year, about a week before Steamboat, Jeff Smith actually calls me on the phone the first time to talk to me again since then. And he says, hey, I could supply you all the stuff if you wanted to do that again next year. And I was in, man. I was in. And then I helped at Park City after a wrist surgery and drove up and threw bales of hay with that thing got canceled half through. And Jeff actually wrote me a check for $100 and a handwritten letter thanking me for helping him. And then I think it was Claude McIlvain who asked me one day that I don't have any clout and I'm not the guy, but and he speaks for Dick Mann. That's Dick's mouth. It used to be Dick's mechanic, actually, when Dick was AMA Pro. And he asked me if I was interested in the off-road position and what would it take to do this. And I said, well, I'd have to have some power to do something. You're not going to override everything, or we're right where we're at. Yeah. And they ended up hiring me for it, gave me $1,000 a month. And then when they replaced me because I was in a conflict of interest of being a hired person and I was an elected trustee. Jack crowned me. Jack Turner became the off-road director that one year, and at Unadilla, he crowned me in the hotel room with a finisher pin, which made me the off-road director. And then the next day, it poured freaking rain like crazy, and I had to cancel it after the first moto. And it was impassable, dude. The track went from this big to this big to this big to being a circle, and bikes were stuck everywhere. And I rode the poor Gold Star, and it was never the same after riding that thing in the mud. But he gave me that position, and then I got on the rules committee because I seemed to know a lot about the bikes. I did the suspension chart for ARMA before they have it, the one on the line. They've taken my business name off because we had a falling out. And I was always the one that fought for lowering the age to get our kids involved, because so many younger people come in at 45. As soon as their kid shows any spark of talent, we lose both of them.
Yeah.
He gets a mini bike. Dad goes off and trails rides with him, when we could have just had a little mini bike race, and we'd have 2 entries, 2 members, and the kid would have, been learning from us and been in his blood for life. You can't get the motorcycle out of kid. So
Dave, we're going to take a little break, and we will be back. I want to talk to you about what you do at the Mecum motorcycle auction every year. And there's a couple of other topics, but I got to get a little plug in for our sponsor, Motion Pro. We'll be right back with more Dave Boyd. Hey, it's Joe Abadi for Vintage Motocross Q&A. When you're replacing a cylinder or a gasket or doing a top end on your bike, many times it's very, very difficult to get to the nuts that are on the base. And you want to be sure that you torque those evenly whenever you change a top end. Motion Pro has come up with this great tool. It's the torque adapter, okay? You can put any size wrench in there, and you can tighten it up. On the back is a 3/8 drive. You can put your torque wrench in there, get the wrench on the nut that's on the base of your cylinder, and make sure everything is torqued evenly. This is a great tool. I have one in the shop. We use it all the time. It comes with instructions as well. Go see your local dealer or get to motionpro.com. And don't forget, go over to Vintage Motocross Q&A to get a 20% discount on all Motion Pro tools. I also want to thank Racer X for running our ad every month in the back of their publication. Racer X, available on your newsstand and online now. We are back with Dave Boydstun. We have had quite a conversation, Dave. It's been quite a journey for you.
And I wanted you asked me twice, and I never answered your question because I was trying to figure out how I would correctly answer your question. So you asked me about the club. You asked me about the club now. The AVDRA, American Vintage Dirt Racers Association. It was founded in September 30th of 1990. That was the same day Speed World opened. By total chance, it's the day the racetrack opened, the big track that we run on. So once COVID hit, and I was having trouble with racetracks, they didn't want to be open any more than this. They just wanted to run some practices. So I started losing the ability to, people didn't want to renew their lease for 10 years because everything had gone up and rider count had gone down. Now we really exist with only 2 tracks, Casa Grande and ACP. ACP wants me to bring my own ambulance, my own flaggers and everything, and has made it so financially impossible that would never happen. He's too busy with practice and never wanted to build himself a bigger crew, and makes great money. So, and he's out remote, so you can't do much without a crew. I get it. Casa Grande changed ownership, and the guy, in laughing, I guess, whatever, said to me, "I want you to know that when you ran your first race at Speed World, I wasn't even born." So here's instead, and he says, "And I don't need a lesson from you, and a history lesson every time we talk." And that was specifically when I was telling him about traditional weekends and why we use them because of other events in other places that my riders like to go to. He didn't want to hear any of that. So I wish him luck. So I gave the club to Gabe sold all the items, everything, stereo, PA, website, Facebook, all the computer shit, to Jim Reich, who helped me for a long time. And I would travel with them in nationals to do ARMA and stuff like that too. So Jim, with the help of Pam and Candy, the main people, a lot of the same workers are still there, and they're kind of struggling to use the Casa Grande track the best they can to go on. I just knew that after 33 years of running the races, that I'd held my breath long enough, and I was ready to pop, and I didn't want to do anything that would jeopardize the club. That was the only way out for me. I hung up from that insulting conversation with that past track owner, called my lead people and said, I'm done. I got to be done or I'm going to kill the club because I'm about to pop somebody. And I did this when I was a kid. I got kicked out of a few tracks.
Yeah.
I blew my temper and just thought there'd be another track. Well, I can't do that to the club. The reputation of the club's too important. It's too established. So they're struggling. So now I've had a meeting with them this week. And as COVID calms down and some other strings come in from bike shows, and like you're going to ask me about the auction and stuff, I've met some other people outside our direct circle, but they're still motorcycle. So now I got this idea to pair up with the largest motorcycle swap meet that they do down in Casa Grande called 11 Mile Corner. He just had 800 people pay to get in the swap meet. So that's kind of a record. It's in the middle of nowhere. So if he can get 800 people to come to a swap meet, I contacted the Flat Track Club. They're interested in going down there. He's interested in making the swap meet a 2-day deal. I'm going to take the rodeo arena and the parking lot and make a vintage track that starts and stops in the arena. And we're going to run a flat track on Saturday night, 2 days of a swap meet, a bike show on Sunday morning. And they said, you're going to get back involved in this promotion? I said, no. These are totally different. I'm going to do one of standalone events now. So I have an idea of one in Flagstaff called Festival of the Pines. I used to run skateboard competitions for them and built a little quarter pipe, half pipes. The kids would pay me to skate. They'd pay me to entertain the crowd. So I think maybe we're at a point where 5 or 6 really good events would be better than trying to do one a month and have 12 a year.
Yeah.
You're dealing with it's too hot, it's too cold, it's too this. Well, but if I go up the mountain at 6,000 foot, it ain't hot. So we can go up there like we do to go to Utah, Monticello, Utah, each July. We get a great turnout up there. Turnout in the club race around 120. It's been about that. You know, we're a small state with a lot of things to choose from.
Sure.
We have stayed solid for 30 years. Been about that. The duel, though, it'll be 350, 400. The biggest duel I had was 805 entries the last year I was ARMA.
Okay.
And, you know, that was cross country and flat track and TT and trials and a day of motocross and a day of vintage motocross. And it was fantastic, man. It was. But the track's lease came to an end and that had to close down.
There's 2 more subjects I want to talk to you about, Dave. And we'll talk about the auction stuff last. I do want to talk to you about your parents early on had such an influence on you getting involved in motorcycle riding, especially your dad with the mini bike and whatnot. But I do remember a few years back, and I just think it's a very interesting part of your life, that you were reunited with your birth mother.
Yes. So
when did you go to look for her? How did you even find out anything about her?
Okay, so when I known all my life that when someone finds out you're adopted, they want to know one of the first things when you're younger is when did you find out?
Yeah.
I don't know that I didn't ever know. I really can't tell you. I always knew I was adopted. My sister always tells me that I'm not really their kid. And I said, you're an accident. My mom had 3 stillborns and was told she couldn't carry, and that's why they adopted me. And the next thing you know, she's pregnant again with my sister. So that was my answer to her. And we went back and forth. And I said, look, they picked me out of everybody in the room. You're an accident. And, you know, so to that. So then, you know, my ex Elizabeth that you met years ago from Venezuela, she knew that I always spoke about wondering about my birth parents and what my history was. You know, what country am I from? What disease did people have or something, you know, your medical history and stuff. So I was always curious about it, but my parents were wonderful to me. That's Jack and Lillian, who I never call them that. They're my mom and my dad.
Yeah.
They were perfect examples of the right kind of people you should be. They are. And so I looked up and I hired a girl. I met a girl at the track that actually goes to Annapolis each year, twice a year, and looks through records for people. And she had somebody at Ancestry.com. So I just wrote on a napkin at the racetrack my birth date, where I thought I was from, and my name. She came back 3 weeks later and told me, we now know your adopted mother, your mother that put you for adoption. We know her name. We found the records of you in Annapolis. So you were born, that's where you came from, blah, 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 blah. And so they found out her last name and they sent out registered letters to that address. Her last name was Vidor, Vidor, and Judith is her name. And find out that Judith had been married 9 times. And this is pretty heavy. This is real. So my mom's husband was a nightclub owner in New York City. My mom was her mom was a dancer in the nightclub.
Okay.
So my mom was 14 the day I was born. So she may have been 13 when she got pregnant with me.
Yeah.
And the parents didn't want anything to do with this girl having a baby, you know, out of wedlock, whatever, and all that. They put her by herself at 14 and 13 years old on a train, and she went down to Bainbridge, Maryland area, which was a port of entry for the Navy. And that was Catholic adoption home where they were Catholic. And so that's where she had me in the adoption home. She wrote a couple of letters. I have the letters in my file, you know, that's her handwriting and why she's here and blah, blah, blah. And she also corresponded with them afterwards. And so she had me, and she got back on the train and she left and went back up to live with her parents. And she married a couple other people in her life. And one of the guys was a mafia dude. Just thinking of the life, working in a speakeasy at that time. And so her mother, she shows me newspaper articles from the New York Times, and here's a picture of her mom, and it's in the 20s. And it's her mother coming back from France with a new dress style and dance style of the flapper dress and the flapper dance.
Huh.
And so you see her, and she's just like any little skinny can chick, you know, with the little hat all tight around him. And that's her mom. So now I'm kind of getting the drift of the nightlife that they would living in, you know, working in a speakeasy kind of a thing like that.
Yeah.
So she married one of the guys. He turns out she divorces him in Vegas when she finds out he's still married, and he's a mafia dude from Mexico. And a week later in that hotel room, they find him dead. She married and divorced these different people, short relationships along the way. I had a brother named Mark that was born 5 years after me that at 35 years old took his life. I saw pictures of his house. He had a freaking mid-engine aluminum V6 freaking dune buggy, 4-seater. Nobody had that shit. He had a lifted blue truck, a blue Harley Electra Glide, full dress, a brand new 79 Elsinore 250. He wore those suede shoes, chukka boots with the great sole. I used to love those. He had those, and he had bell bottoms, and he had a big bug mullet out the back, riding the freaking CR over the fucking jump out front. So we were very much alike, and he had a 7-bedroom house with 7 garages, Thousand Oaks, that Mom bought, and she owned 33 properties when I met her 6 years back. She had 33 properties, and her house is on a street called Seclusion Lane. And there's an actress named Darby that played in a presidential TV show. She's a redhead. That's her next door neighbor. My mom says,
you're talking about, Dave, let me interrupt you just a second. Your natural mom owned 33 houses when you met her?
She still does now. She has 33 properties in the city of Glendale. And right out her front window, you can look right on the tennis courts, are Walt Disney's right there.
And you had a biological brother who committed suicide?
Yes. And her husband of 9 years passed away, was a Caltrans lawyer. She told me that was the only time she ever cried in her life. And she felt guilty about it because he was totally incoherent, and she went in the bathroom to cry. She wasn't an emotional person. I can see where some of my hard exterior comes across, but I see my other parents, what the effect of mellowing me out a bit. And she's super wealthy. She still has a freaking little flip phone. She makes all her renters deposit the check on the same day they originally moved in on. And they go to the bank and deposit a check. They don't bring it to her. And then she goes to the bank to see if they did. I spent enough time with her. We'd got to go to the bank and see. And she had a knee replacement. I saw her last, it was about 4 years ago. She was 87, healthy and strong as can be. But definitely, she told me the third time I showed up, Well, she wanted to show me her wealth the second time, drove me all around, pointed, that's my apartment, Mom. That's my thing over there. And she introduced me to her lawyer, and a really nice lady. And apparently a lady who helped her during that divorce from the Mexican dude, because he took everything from her. And she helped her get back established and signed for her first house. And now she's been with her through all these properties she owns and everything. And she took me outside and talked to me and told me that she told my mom that this is your son. You can tell it's your son. He looks like you. He is like you. You should do something for him. You got so much and you're doing nothing with it. Do something for him. So she says, I told her to buy you a freaking house. And if you're not a good son, she'll take it away from you the day she dies. So she had me go look for a house. I found a beautiful house, Joe, with a massive barn in the back, fresh rebuild. It was selling for $499, and I had $300
in Arizona.
Yes, and the guy bought it for $425. It was the first remodel in an old neighborhood.
Yeah,
about 10 more got down, and the house sold for $1.7 18 months later. Yeah. So I didn't find the right house. My mom said, you don't know real estate. I know real estate. And I said, well, this guy's willing to bring his plane out and pick you up today, Mom, and bring you back. You can bring the lawyer with you. Oh, no. And of course, the house sold. So then I go back out there to talk to her, and the lawyer comes out in the front to talk to me and says this. And then Mom walks out and says to me, it's too bad your parents didn't do better for themselves, then you wouldn't have had to find me. Those are my last words to my mom. I said, you know what? She was telling me, that was Tom White was still around 2.5, 3 years ago. Yeah. And I never wanted to talk to her again. I said, bullshit, man. I know the difference of a person that's a quality person that raised me. And this lady, she's vile, man. She's mean. And I said, if you think I looked you up to find a house from you, you're crazy. I thought after being with Nancy, watching her have kids be born, have grandkids, I'm so proud of them. After spending 10 years with Nancy, you learn a little more about a family thing. And I thought my mom would want to know that I turned out okay, that I could have taken the wrong turn and that I turned out okay. But instead, it was like degrading. And I've talked to her lawyer once a year around Christmas time just to see if she's okay and tell her if there's ever something wrong, you call me up and I'll come right out to help her out. But that was kicking me in the belly, dude. And but no hard feelings. I have her genes, and I know I'm a healthy guy because of it. So, dude, she's cruising around the hills there at 90 years old, like she's 15. So that's the good side.
I got to take a break. We're going to come back and wrap it up with Dave Boydstun. This weekend, November 11th, I will be your MC at Langston Motorsports, the annual bike show. That is on Paris, California, on Illinois Avenue. That's Langston Motorsports this weekend, November 11th. I hope to see you there. My guest tonight is Dave Boydstun. We've talked about a lot of different things. Dave, over the past 5 or 6 years, I think I've been there 3 or 4 times. You bring a slew of motorcycles to the Mika Motorcycle Auction in Las Vegas. How many bikes will you have there this year? What will you have on store?
21 bikes this year. So that's a record. 17 last year. So 21. And I'll just run down. I got a beautiful little CT1 Yamaha gold one. It's like brand.
Tell us about what you're going to have there. Sure.
Yeah. A 71 CB450 flat tracker, which just it's a good display item. I've got an Ascot bike that raced in 65 and 66, a 61 CL72 that was built by Mr. Honda, which is known as Mr. Honda. and he's published 5 books on the CL72. So this is an actual bike with pedigree. 73 350 Astro Bultaco back to stock, a 72 CZ 125 that came out of the York, Pennsylvania swap meet. A 100 Penton Berkshire 74, a 74 and a half Mint 400 with 325 miles titled, an 82 490 Mako that looks like me and you rode it one afternoon and parked it. And then we knew that they sabotaged it, so we were afraid to ride it maybe. That was the sabotage bike. They say the bike that killed Mako because of the heat treat problems.
Yeah.
The 82. A 75 Yamaha MX 250, which was the last bike Yamaha called an MX, and the first models they made with a monoshock. Yes. 68 orange Capra. I always do well. This has original tires, complete original bike. Beautiful shape. A 70 Kawasaki 100 Centurion. A Super Pioneer, the one I bought off of Alex.
Yeah.
Bought at that auction. 71 400 Cross that actually has documentation proven that Lars Larson rode the bike in 1971, Trans AMA 500 support class. There was 7 races. Lars won the first 5, got a second, didn't ride the last one, was crowned the national champ. The thing is, his bike's in the Hall of Fame in AMA. And you say, well, how could it be there and in your garage? Because the one in my garage is the stock frame, and the one down there is the titanium bike that AMA outlawed. That's why it's in there. A 75 360 Persang like new. A Pomeroy bike, basically. A 71 Rickman Petite Matisse, the little dinky one like a Hodaka. It's got a beautiful job, racing green, and with a 75 Yamaha in it. 75 CZ Falta 250, I always do well with one of them. The 68 Mark II Persang, like the one that was featured in VMX a few years ago. I did it, did very well. The Sidewinder Mako from the movie Sidewinder.
You sent me Dave, you sent me a picture of that bike this morning. Now,
I took those in the backyard this morning.
Do you own that bike, Dave?
No, you know the guy from the East Coast. He's a client of mine, and he just asked me if I would sell it for him. He's going to come out. So if you know the guy and you're there, you might run into him. Okay. He just wants to have his name stay out of it. I helped with, but not much, a 74 Elsinore 250 that's done in red. So it looks like what a lot of guys wish they would have looked like instead of green. Yeah. It's beautiful. It's been fired up. It's got everything on it. And we're going to risk it on the expensive day and see if I have a BSA Rocket 3 with under 2,000 miles on it with original paint, rebuilt motor, relaced wheels, spokes, everything re-chromed. It's beautiful. That bike was won the Daytona 200. Not that bike, but a bike like it with Dick Mann on it. The first year it came out, and the following year he came back and did it on the 750 Honda. Do you know how he won those 2 races, Joe?
I don't, Dave.
They had to run stock gas tanks, and those 2 bikes each held more than a gallon more than the competitors. And Dick had one less gas stop than the others and led at the end of the race. That's for real.
How many more bikes you got there, Dave? Come on.
Then the Bandito. I've got a Mark I Bandito, so that's 21 bikes total right there. And if they hit the reserve, it'll be 4 times what I paid for my house. So I can't believe it.
I just you've always done great. Your bikes are quality there. You've got AMS. So many things that you've done to help promote this sport is absolutely incredible, and we learned so much about Dave Boydstun this evening, and even some things that you opened up to us emotionally about in your personal life, Dave. I don't think I've ever heard a story quite like that before. I want to thank you for being my guest.
Joe, I want to thank you for being my friend. You have been my friend from the beginning, and I've heard your story too, and you have a great story, and you should share that with everybody someday too.
Someday I will. Someday I will, Dave. In the meantime, thank you again, and I hope to see you at the Mika motorcycle auction. Dave Boydstun, everyone. Thank you, Dave.
See you, everybody. Thanks for listening. Support Joe. Thanks, Joe.
Dave Boydstun, again, with a great story and so much going on there. I'm going to run this little clip I made the other day, and then we'll come back to wrap it up from Vintage Motocross Q&A. In our Moto Showcase segment tonight, we take a look at a 1977 KTM 400 that was sent in to us by Paul Griffin of Monterey, California. Here's a picture of Paul flanked by Brad Lackey, and Brock Glover. Paul writes, I purchased this bike from Lars Larson, and of course, I complimented him on the restoration. Lars explained to me that when you're a world champion and you've ridden for KTM and Husqvarna, they give you special treatment. This bike was restored for me, Lars Larson, by KTM in Austria, then returned to me in Sweden. Every nut and bolt is correct on the bike, and I felt very fortunate, Paul says, that Lars was willing to sell it to me. I want to thank you for featuring it on Vintage Motocross Q&A. I really enjoy the show. Well, thank you, Paul Griffin. Get us your mailing address and we'll get you a sticker sheet, compliments of vinco.com. Vinco, keep the ride going. I want to thank our new supporter. This is a Vintage Motocross Q&A supporter, and it is the Moto Barn, George Ackerman. We had a great time down there at the Moto Barn just a few weeks ago. George Ackerman is now a supporter of Vintage Motocross Q&A. Another great supporter of ours is Mike Chamberlain. Thank you, Mike Chamberlain, for your support. And I want to thank Keith Geisner. Been giving away books here for a couple of years, whether it's Finding 9 or Discovering 6 Days. Thank you, Keith Geisner. Make your plans now. It's coming up January 21st. New York Swap Meet. That is at the York Fairgrounds in York, Pennsylvania. Reserve your time now. Reserve your spot now, rather. They sold out last year. And once again, this weekend, I will be your MC at the Langston Motorsports Bike Show. That happens in Paris, California on Illinois Avenue. If you still want a shirt, we got it for sale at Vintage Motocross Q&A. Follow the link in the show description. Get yourself a shirt. We want to thank our other sponsors, like Vinco. They've got top end kits, crank kits, so much. They're at vinco.com. And I believe Full Circle Racing still got backing plates for CZs. You heard me mention earlier our good friend and sponsor, Paul Parkinson Sr., replicamotorcycleparts.com. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode of Vintage Motocross Q&A. I want to thank my guest tonight, Dave Boydstun. What an absolutely incredible time with Dave Boydstun, talking to him about so many things. And yeah, we'll be back next week with another episode of Vintage Motocross Q&A. Oh, and I did want to mention one other thing. You may have read about the International Motocross Museum, and Terry Good and I have been going back and forth for a while now, probably 7 or 8 months. And I will make that move to Chicago and the International Motocross Museum. We've got a few things to hammer out yet. I will be visiting. And the team he has put together probably in early December in Chicago. But, yeah, I'm really excited. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And I feel that all the talents that I have, that I've honed over the years, will be put to excellent use at the International Motocross Museum. More about that as we learn more about it. But thank you, Terry Good. Thank you for watching Vintage Motocross Q&A. Thank you, Jordan, Chelsea, Susie, and, of course, my guest tonight, Dave Boydstun. See you next time on Vintage Motocross Q&A.